The ship was dying. Captain knew this the way a sailor knows a storm is coming. He could feel it in the trembling of the deck beneath his feet, hear it in the groaning of metal that had held together for 30 years but would not hold much longer. The engine room was a nightmare of sparks and smoke. His chief engineer stood before him with 4 arms hanging limp at his sides and despair written across his face. "How long?" asked. "Life support will fail in 6 days, maybe 7 if we shut down everything except the essentials." Closed his 3 eyes and let out a long breath. The quiet passage had been his home for most of his adult life. He had raised his children in these corridors. He had buried his wife from this very deck, sending her body into the stars as was the custom of their people. Now the ship would become his coffin too, along with the 18 crew members who trusted him with their lives. "There is another option," his navigator said quietly. She was young, barely past her first century, and still believed in options. "We are not far from human space." The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew about humans. They were the new species, the unpredictable ones, the creatures who smiled with their teeth like predators and laughed at danger and did things that made no logical sense. Some said they were generous to a fault. Others said they were violent beyond reason. The galaxy could not agree on what humans were, only that they were dangerous in ways nobody fully understood. "The humans," repeated. "Their patrol routes pass through this sector. If we send a distress signal, they might hear it. And if they decide we are enemies, if they board us and take what they want." The navigator had no answer. Nobody did. Looked around at his crew. He saw fear in their eyes, but he also saw something else. Hope. The desperate hope of people who had run out of choices. "Send the signal," he said. The waiting was the worst part. Sat in his command chair and watched the stars through the cracked viewport and wondered if he had just killed everyone aboard. They were a careful people. They did not take risks. They did not trust strangers. They certainly did not call out to humans for help. 3 hours passed, then 4. The temperature on the bridge began to drop as they diverted power away from heating systems. Crew members wrapped themselves in blankets and huddled together for warmth. Then the sensor console beeped. "Ship approaching," the navigator announced, her voice tight with tension. "Human vessel, they are hailing us." Straightened in his chair, put them through. The flickered to life and got his first look at a human. She was smaller than he expected, with brown skin and dark hair pulled back from her face. Her eyes were the color of rich soil, and they held a warmth that surprised him. "This is commander of the Sol Defense Corps vessel Carolina Dawn," she said. "We received your distress signal. What is your situation?" Found his voice. "I am captain of the trade vessel Quiet Passage. Our engines have failed. We are drifting without power. Life support will not last much longer." The human nodded. "Understood. We are coming alongside. Prepare to receive a boarding party." The connection cut out. His crew exchanged nervous glances. A boarding party. The words had an ominous ring to them. The humans arrived 20 minutes later. There were 3 of them. Commander came first, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had walked onto strange ships many times before. Behind her came a tall man with clever hands and grease already staining his fingers. The third was a woman with kind eyes and a medical bag over her shoulder. "This is my chief engineer," Commander said, gesturing to the man. "And Price, our medic. See what you can do about their engines. Check on the crew." Just like that, no demands, no negotiations, no talk of payment or favors owed. The humans simply went to work. Followed down to the engine room, watching in amazement as the human crawled into spaces that should have been too small for him. His fingers dancing over alien machinery he had never seen before. "This is a Class 4 drive system, right?" asked, not looking up from his work. "Yes, how do you know that?" "Read about it once, always wanted to see one up close." He grinned and saw those teeth that humans showed when they were happy. It should have been threatening. Instead, it felt almost friendly. "Hand me that coupling over there, the blue one." Hours passed, worked without rest, without complaint, without asking for anything except the occasional tool. He jury-rigged solutions from spare parts and creative thinking. He welded and rewired and rebuilt. He cursed cheerfully when things went wrong and laughed with delight when they went right. Meanwhile, Price moved through the ship, treating injuries that the crew had been hiding. A broken arm that had healed badly, an infection that had gone untreated, a child with a fever that would not break. She gave medicine and changed bandages and spoke softly to frightened patients who had never been so close to a human before. 18 hours after they arrived, emerged from the engine room covered in sweat and grime, and wearing the biggest smile had ever seen. "She will not win any races," said, "but she will get you home." Did not know what to say. He stood there, all 4 arms hanging at his sides, and tried to find words in any of the 6 languages he spoke. None of them seemed adequate. "Commander," he finally managed, turning to the human officer, "what do you want in return for this?" Looked at him with those warm brown eyes. She seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. "You needed help," she said simply. "That is enough." The humans returned to their ship. The Carolina Dawn stayed nearby until the quiet passage confirmed that all systems were stable, and then they were gone, vanishing into the darkness between stars. Stood on his bridge and watched them go. His navigator came to stand beside him. "I do not understand them," she said. "No," agreed, "neither do I." He filed his report that night. It was a simple document, just a few pages describing the engine failure and the unexpected rescue. He sent it to the trade consortium as required and thought nothing more of it. He did not know that those few pages would change everything. He did not know that a small act of kindness, given freely and without expectation, would ripple outward across the galaxy like a stone thrown into still water. He did not know that humanity was about to teach the universe a lesson it would never forget. But he was about to find out. 6 months later, was eating breakfast when his communicator buzzed with a message from his sister. She lived on the far from the shipping lanes where spent most of his life. They spoke perhaps twice a year, usually on holidays. This was not a holiday. "Have you seen the news?" her message read. "You are famous." Nearly choked on his food. He turned on the Galactic News Network and stared at the screen in disbelief. There was his face, or rather a picture taken from his official trading license, displayed next to footage of the Carolina Dawn. A young journalist was speaking rapidly about the incident, about the humans who had appeared from nowhere and saved a stranded crew without asking for anything in return. Her name was, and she had found quiet report buried in the Trade Consortium's public records. She had pulled it out, polished it up, and broadcast it to the entire galaxy. Now everyone was talking about it. "This is not the humanity we have been told about," was saying on the screen. "This is not the violent, unpredictable species that other powers have warned us against. This is something else entirely. This is a people capable of extraordinary kindness." Turned off the screen and sat in silence for a long time. On Earth, the story spread even faster. Woke up one morning to find reporters camped outside her apartment building. Her commanding officers called her in for meetings. Politicians wanted to shake her hand. She hated every moment of it. "We did not do anything special," she told anyone who would listen. "We just did our jobs. We helped people who needed help. That is what you are supposed to do." But humanity did not want to hear about ordinary duty. They wanted heroes. They wanted proof that they were good, that they mattered, that they could be something more than the violent newcomers the galaxy feared. And her crew became symbols of everything humanity hoped to be. Handled the attention better than his commander. He gave interviews and smiled for cameras and told the story of fixing the engines with whatever parts he could find. People loved him. They loved his enthusiasm, his creativity, his refusal to give up when the job seemed impossible. Price returned to her medical work, but she found that her patient list had grown. Aliens who had never trusted human doctors before were now asking for appointments. They had heard about the medic who treated crew members with the same care she would give her own family. They wanted that care for themselves. The ripples kept spreading. The trade consortium held an emergency meeting to discuss the incident. For years, they had maintained strict limits on human merchants. Humans were too new, too unknown, too risky. But now the public was demanding change. Ordinary citizens were writing letters and signing petitions, and asking why their government was refusing to trade with a species that had proven itself so generous. The consortium had no good answer, so they changed the rules. Was a trade negotiator who had spent most of his career being turned away from alien ports. He was used to closed doors and polite refusals, and the constant reminder that humanity was not welcome in galactic commerce. When he received the invitation to visit he read it 3 times before he believed it was real. "This is because of you," he told when he called to thank her. "You opened a door that has been locked for decades." Shook her head. "I just fixed a ship. You are the one who has to walk through the door." Walked through. He arrived with a small delegation, expecting difficult negotiations and careful distrust. What he found instead was a welcome unlike anything he had experienced. Ordinary citizens lined the streets to watch the human delegation pass. They waved and cheered and held up signs with messages of friendship. Children pressed against barriers, reaching out to touch the strange aliens who had saved Captain and his crew. Elders who had never spoken to a human in their lives offered traditional blessings in trembling voices. A man who had built his career on staying calm under pressure had to stop and wipe his eyes more than once. The negotiations went well, better than well. The trade representatives seemed eager to find common ground. They offered deals that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. They spoke of partnership and mutual benefit and long-term friendship. When asked why they were being so generous, the chief negotiator smiled. "We have been watching your species for a long time," she said. "We have been afraid of what you might do to us, but now we have seen what you do for others. We are no longer afraid. We are curious. We want to know what it feels like to have humans as friends." Back on the quiet passage, Captain received a package. It arrived without warning, delivered by a human cargo ship that happened to be passing through. Inside was a case containing engine components of extraordinary quality, parts that would have cost more than earned in 10 years. The note attached was written in careful script. "For your kindness in sending that report, we do not forget." Sat in his cabin and held the note for a long time. He had never met. He had only watched the man work for 18 hours and then disappear back to his own ship. He had never expected to hear from any of those humans again. But had remembered, had tracked down the quiet passage across thousands of light years just to say thank you. His navigator found him an hour later, still sitting in the same spot, still holding the note. "Captain, are you all right?" Looked up at her. His 3 eyes were bright with emotion. "I think I am beginning to understand them," he said quietly. "The humans. I think I am beginning to understand why they do what they do." "Why?" Considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Because they cannot help it. Kindness is in their nature. It flows out of them like water from a spring. They do not do good deeds because they expect something in return. They do good deeds because doing good makes them feel whole." He looked down at the note again. "And they remember everyone who shows them kindness in return. They remember and they find ways to give back, even when giving back is difficult, even when it costs them something." The navigator did not know what to say. She had grown up hearing stories about human violence, human recklessness, human danger. Nobody had ever told her stories like this. "What do we do now?" she asked. Smiled, a rare expression for a captain. "Now we wait," he said. "We wait and see what happens when the galaxy learns what we have learned. I suspect things are about to get very interesting." He was right. Things were about to get interesting in ways that nobody, human or alien, could have predicted. The flood was coming, and it would change everything. The flood began with a single ship. Her name was the Mercy Road, and she was crewed by human doctors who had grown tired of waiting for politicians to act. They had watched the news about Captain and the Carolina Dawn. They had seen the outpouring of goodwill, the open doors, the sudden friendship between humans and they had asked themselves a simple question: what if we did more? The Mercy Road flew into non-aligned space with a cargo hold full of medicine and a crew ready to help anyone who needed it. They asked for nothing in return. They treated the sick and healed the wounded and moved on to the next world, leaving behind only gratitude and wonder. Other ships followed, engineering vessels staffed by volunteers who wanted to build instead of fight, agricultural specialists who knew how to coax life from barren soil, teachers who believed that knowledge should be shared freely, artists who painted murals on alien walls and taught alien children to sing human songs. Nobody had ordered them to go. No government had organized their missions. They simply saw a chance to do good and they took it. The galaxy did not know what to make of this. Species that had lived for thousands of years had never encountered anything like it. Charity was not unknown, but it was usually calculated, usually political, usually attached to strings that could be pulled later. These humans asked for nothing. They gave freely and then left. It made no sense. Watched the flood with growing amazement. He had come to negotiate trade agreements, but the agreements almost seemed to negotiate themselves. They were so eager to work with humans that they offered terms more favorable than anything had dared to hope for. And it was not just the government. Ordinary citizens appeared at the human embassy every day, bringing gifts and invitations. They wanted to host human visitors in their homes. They wanted to share meals and stories and traditions. They wanted to show their gratitude in every way they could imagine. "We have never seen anything like this," told in one of their regular calls. "They love us, actually love us. I do not know how to explain it." Smiled tiredly. She had been pulled away from active duty to serve as a public face for the new human friendship. She gave speeches and attended ceremonies and shook hands with dignitaries until her arm ached. She was not made for this kind of work. She was made for command, for action, for the simple clarity of duty. But she understood that this was important, so she did it anyway. "They are grateful," she said. "That is all. We helped them and now they want to help us. It is simple." "It is not simple at all," replied. "Nothing about this is simple. Do you know that I received 17 dinner invitations yesterday? 17. I do not have time to eat 17 dinners." Despite his complaints, was smiling. They all were. For the first time in human history, their species was not feared. They were welcomed. They were wanted. It was a strange and wonderful feeling. The Galactic Assembly took notice. The Assembly was the closest thing the galaxy had to a central government. Representatives from over 40 species gathered there to discuss matters of mutual concern. Humans had been admitted as observers a decade earlier, but they had never been invited to speak, until now. The invitation came addressed to Commander, requesting her presence at the next full session. She was to address the Assembly on the subject of human relations. Read the invitation 3 times, then she called. "I cannot do this," she said. "I am not a diplomat. I fix problems and command ships. I do not give speeches to aliens." "You talked to Captain," pointed out. "That worked out pretty well." "That was different. That was just talking to one person. This is talking to the entire galaxy." "Same thing, really, just more people listening." Was not convinced, but she went anyway. She stood on the floor of the Galactic Assembly, a small human woman surrounded by beings of every shape and size imaginable, and she spoke from the heart. "I do not have a prepared speech," she said. "I am not good at prepared speeches, so I will just tell you what I believe." She paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. "I believe that kindness is not weakness. I believe that helping others is not foolish. I believe that the measure of a species is not how much power it can accumulate, but how it treats those who have no power at all." She thought of Captain drifting helpless in the dark. She thought of the injured crew members that had treated. She thought of, covered in grease, grinning with delight at a problem solved. "We helped a stranded ship because they needed help. That is all. We did not expect anything in return. We did not want anything in return. We just wanted to help." Her voice grew stronger. "And now I see the same thing happening across the galaxy. Humans reaching out to help wherever they can, opening their doors and their hearts. Other species watching and wondering if maybe, just maybe, there is a better way to exist together." She spread her hands. "I do not know if we are doing this right. I do not know if our approach will work in the long run. But I know this. I would rather fail at being kind than succeed at being cruel. And I believe most humans feel the same way." She stepped back. The assembly was silent for a long moment. Then, starting with the delegation, applause began to spread through the chamber. Not everyone was clapping. In a private viewing room far from the assembly floor, Ambassador of the Dominion watched speech with cold eyes. They were a practical species. They believed in power and control and the careful manipulation of lesser beings. They had built an empire on fear and maintained it through strength. These humans threatened everything they had built. Their foolish generosity was spreading through the galaxy like a disease, weakening the natural order, making species soft and trusting. If it continued, they would find their influence shrinking, their control slipping away. "They have shown us their weakness," murmured to his aide. "Now we will exploit it." Back on Earth, a retired teacher named watched speech from her small apartment. She had never been to space. She had never met an alien. She was 73 years old and her hands shook slightly when she wrote. But watching speak, she felt something stir inside her, a desire to help, a need to be part of this wonderful, impossible thing that was happening. She sat down at her desk and began to write a letter. She addressed it to any who would like a human friend. She wrote about her life, her hopes, her gratitude for the new friendship between their peoples. She asked nothing in return except the chance to connect with someone different from herself. She was not the only one. Across Earth, millions of people sat down to write similar letters. Some were long, some were short. Some were eloquent, some were simple. All of them were genuine. Within weeks, a massive translation effort was. Volunteers worked around the clock to convert human letters into script. Ships carried bundles of paper across the stars to the. When the letters arrived, they wept. These were not diplomatic messages. They were not trade proposals. They were just letters from ordinary humans who wanted to say hello, to share a piece of their lives, to offer friendship across the vast emptiness of space. They had almost forgotten what such simple warmth felt like. Captain received a letter from. He read it slowly, savoring every word. When he finished, he sat down and wrote a reply. A flood had begun and nothing would ever be the same. The trap was carefully laid. Ambassador had spent months preparing for this moment. He had studied humans, learned their weaknesses, identified their pressure points. He knew that they valued loyalty above almost everything else. He knew that they would do foolish things to protect their own. The cargo vessel Dusty Road was a perfect target. She was a small ship carrying ordinary goods, crewed by 12 humans who had no military value whatsoever. Captain Greg was a merchant, not a warrior. His crew included mechanics, cargo handlers, and a cook who made the best soup in the sector. They had no idea they were about to become pawns in a much larger game. The patrol vessels appeared without warning, emerging from behind an asteroid where they had been waiting. Greg ordered his crew to remain calm, to cooperate, to trust that this was some kind of misunderstanding that could be resolved through communication. He was wrong. They boarded the dusty road and accused the crew of espionage. They claimed to have evidence that the ship was carrying surveillance equipment. They ignored Greg's protests, ignored his requests to contact human authorities, ignored everything except their own fabricated narrative. Within hours, the dusty road crew was in chains, and the galaxy was holding its breath. The news spread faster than anyone expected. Every major network carried the story. Every species watched to see how humanity would respond. The conventional wisdom was clear. Humans were emotional creatures, prone to violence when provoked. This was a provocation designed to make them lash out, to start a war that would prove all the old fears about humanity were justified. On Earth, the military began mobilizing. Warships were placed on high alert. Admirals drew up battle plans. Politicians gave angry speeches. Everything seemed to be moving toward exactly the conflict that Ambassador wanted. Then something unexpected happened. A woman named requested a meeting with the highest levels of government. Was a negotiator-like, but she was also something more. She was a true believer in the power of human kindness. She had watched the events of the past year with growing wonder, and she had an idea that seemed crazy even to her. "Let me take a delegation to the," she said. "Not soldiers, not diplomats, ordinary people. Teachers, doctors, artists. We will offer ourselves as hostages in exchange for the dusty road crew." The room erupted in protests. This was insane. This was suicide. This was exactly what they wanted. Waited for the noise to die down. "They want us to fight," she said quietly. "They want us to prove that we are the violent monsters they have always claimed we are. If we attack, we lose, even if we win the battle. But if we respond with kindness, if we offer our own lives in exchange for our people, we show the galaxy something it has never seen before." She looked around the room. "We show them what humans are really made of." The debate lasted for days. In the end, the government gave permission, though they thought was leading herself and her volunteers to their deaths. 73 people stepped forward to join the delegation. They were teachers who had spent their lives shaping young minds. They were doctors who had dedicated themselves to healing. They were artists who believed in the power of beauty to change hearts. They were ordinary humans who loved their species enough to die for it. The shuttle that carried them to space was unarmed. It broadcast its peaceful intentions on all frequencies. It made no attempt to hide or defend itself. They intercepted the shuttle and brought it aboard their command ship. Ambassador himself came to meet the delegation, expecting to find terrified hostages begging for their lives. Instead, he found standing tall, her eyes steady, her voice calm. "We have come to offer an exchange," she said. "Release the crew of the dusty road, take us instead." Stared at her. This was not how humans were supposed to behave. This was not the violent reaction he had anticipated. "You would sacrifice yourselves for a dozen merchants." "We would sacrifice ourselves for our people," replied. "Any of our people, all of our people, that is what it means to be human." They did not know what to do. Their entire strategy depended on humanity responding with aggression. A peaceful delegation of volunteers offering themselves as hostages was not something they had planned for. And then the galaxy responded. The Trade Consortium announced immediate economic sanctions against the Dominion. They froze assets, canceled contracts, and closed their ports to all vessels. It was the largest economic action in history. Within hours, 12 other species had joined the sanctions. The economy began to crumble. Trade routes that had been open for centuries suddenly closed. Partners who had been reliable for generations suddenly refused to take their calls. The journalist who had first told Captain's story, broadcast a scathing report about aggression. She called Ambassador a coward and a bully. She asked the galaxy how any species could attack innocent merchants, and then refused to release them when peaceful volunteers offered to take their place. Her report was viewed billions of times across dozens of worlds. On every planet where humans had helped, protests erupted. Aliens who had never met a human took to the streets demanding the release of the Dusty Road crew. They carried signs in human languages they did not speak. They chanted slogans they barely understood. They stood united against an act of cruelty directed at the species that had shown them so much kindness. Ambassador watched his careful plans collapse around him. He had expected isolation and war. Instead, he had unified the galaxy against his own people. 72 hours after arrived on the command ship, the Dusty Road crew was released. They were returned to human space unharmed, along with all 73 volunteers. No shots were fired. No blood was spilled. The crisis ended not with violence but with the quiet triumph of kindness over cruelty. Captain Greg held a press conference after his release. Reporters asked him dozens of questions about his captivity, about the political implications of the crisis. He answered them patiently, but the question that made him stop and think was the simplest one of all. What did you feel when you learned that the volunteers were coming? Greg was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I felt proud, he said, prouder than I have ever felt in my life, because I knew right then that being human meant something. It meant that no matter how far from home you were, no matter how much trouble you were in, your people would come for you. He wiped his eyes. 73 strangers offered to die so that my crew could live. I did not know their names. They did not know mine, but they came anyway because that is what humans do. We take care of each other. He looked directly into the camera. I thought I understood what humanity meant before this. I was wrong. Now I understand, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what those volunteers taught me. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched Greg speak. Many of them had feared humanity once. Many of them had believed the stories about human violence and unpredictability. Now they believed something different. They believed in kindness. They believed in courage. They believed that maybe, just maybe, these strange creatures from Earth were exactly what the galaxy needed. And in a quiet corner of the Dominion, Ambassador was stripped of his rank and sent into exile. He had tried to prove that humans were monsters. Instead, he had proven they were heroes. 5 years had passed since a broken ship sent a desperate signal into the void. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Unity, the flagship of the joint human fleet that patrolled the peaceful borders of Allied space. She still wore her uniform the same way she always had, neat and practical, without any of the decorations she had earned. She still preferred action to ceremony. Some things never changed. But everything else had. The galaxy that had grown up in was gone. In its place was something new, something built on foundations of trust and mutual aid that would have seemed impossible a decade earlier. The human alliance had become the most influential diplomatic force in the quadrant. 37 species had signed treaties of friendship. Trade flowed freely across borders that had once been fortified. Medical ships traveled without fear through regions that had once been war zones. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness. Ran an engineering academy now. He had resisted the idea at first, insisting that he was just a mechanic who liked to fix things, but his reputation had grown too large to ignore. Young engineers from a dozen species came to learn from the human who had saved the quiet passage with spare parts and determination. His students adored him. He taught them that no problem was unsolvable, that creativity was more valuable than credentials, that the true measure of an engineer was not what they built for themselves, but what they fixed for others. He still got his hands dirty every chance he got, climbing into engine rooms with the same enthusiasm he had shown on that first desperate night aboard the ship. Price had turned her small medical practice into the largest relief organization in galactic history. The Healing Hands initiative operated hundreds of ships across thousands of worlds. They went wherever there was suffering, wherever there was need, wherever people had given up hope of help arriving. Herself was rarely in the spotlight anymore. She preferred to work in the clinics, treating patients with her own hands, just as she had always done. But everyone knew her name. Everyone knew what she had started. And everyone knew that if they were hurt or sick or dying, a Healing Hands ship might appear in their sky, asking nothing in return except the chance to help. Had become the human ambassador to the Galactic Assembly. He spent his days negotiating treaties and mediating disputes, and trying to spread the philosophy that had transformed human relations with the rest of the galaxy. He was good at it, but he never forgot where it had all begun. He kept a picture on his desk of and her crew, taken the day after they rescued the Quiet Passage. They looked tired and happy and completely unaware of the storm they had just set in motion. Looked at that picture every morning to remind himself that great changes often begin with small kindnesses. Captain had finally written his memoirs. Publishers had been asking him for years, but he had always refused, insisting that he was not an important person, that he had simply been in the right place at the wrong time. Eventually, his sister convinced him that the galaxy deserved to hear his story in his own words. The book opened with a simple line, "I only wanted to survive. I did not know that humans would teach me how to live." It became one of the most widely read books in galactic history. Billions of beings read his account of his rescue, his confusion, his gradual understanding of what made humans different from every other species he had encountered. They read about his correspondence with the retired teacher who had sent him a letter and became one of his closest friends. They read about his journey from frightened merchant captain to accidental architect of a new era. Himself remained humble. He still flew the Quiet Passage, though the ship had been repaired and upgraded so many times that almost nothing remained of the original vessel. He still carried cargo across the stars. He still insisted that he was nobody special. But everywhere he went, people recognized him. They thanked him for telling his story. They told him that his book had changed their lives. He accepted their gratitude with quiet grace and then got back to work, because that was who he had always been. The biggest surprise came from There were an ancient species who had withdrawn from galactic affairs centuries ago. They lived in isolation, refusing contact with the outside universe, content to exist alone in their distant corner of space. Nobody had spoken to in living memory. Then, without warning, a vessel appeared at the edge of human space. It broadcast a simple message requesting permission to approach. The galaxy held its breath. The ambassador arrived at the Galactic Assembly 2 weeks later. She was tall and slender, with silver skin that seemed to glow from within and eyes that had seen pass. She walked to the speaking platform with slow, deliberate steps, as if she was unused to being watched. "We have observed you," she said, her voice carrying through the silent chamber. "For 5 years, we have watched your species. We have seen how you treat those in need. We have seen how you respond to cruelty with kindness. We have seen how you build bridges where others build walls." She paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. "We ended our isolation because of what we witnessed. We wanted no part of a galaxy defined by fear and suspicion, but a galaxy defined by compassion and generosity is something different. That is a galaxy we wish to join." She turned to face the human delegation. "We have watched what happens when humans decide someone is worth caring about. We wish to be worthy of that care. We ask for your friendship." Rose from his seat and walked across the chamber floor. He extended his hand, the human gesture of greeting that had become recognized throughout the galaxy. "You are welcome," he said simply. "You have always been welcome, you just did not know it yet." The ambassador took his hand. The chamber erupted in applause. In a corner of the room, far from the celebration, a lone figure watched in silence. Ambassador had been allowed to attend the session as an observer, a courtesy extended by the very species he had once tried to destroy. He was older now, his scales faded, his eyes tired. Exile had not been kind to him. A human aide noticed him standing alone. She was young, barely out of training, with no idea who he was or what he had done. She saw only an elderly alien looking lost and lonely in a crowd of celebrating strangers. She walked over to him with a cup of coffee in her hand. "You look like you could use this," she said, offering him the cup. "Would you like to sit down? I can find you a chair." Stared at her. 5 years ago, he had orchestrated a crisis designed to prove that humans were violent monsters. He had nearly started a war. He had caused suffering to dozens of innocent people, and now a human was offering him coffee. He took the cup. His hands trembled slightly. "Thank you," he said. The words felt strange in his mouth. He was not sure he had ever said them before. The aide smiled and helped him find a seat. Then she returned to her duties, unaware that she had just demonstrated everything the galaxy had learned about humanity over the past 5 years. Kindness was not weakness. Compassion was not foolishness. The willingness to help strangers, to offer comfort without expectation of return, to treat even enemies with basic decency was not a flaw in human nature. It was the greatest strength humanity possessed. And as the celebration continued around him, as the ambassador shook hands with delegates from dozens of species, as the galaxy moved forward into a future built on trust instead of fear, finally understood what he had been fighting against all along. He had been fighting against hope, against kindness, against the simple truth that beings could choose to be better than their worst instincts. He had lost, and somehow, sitting there with a cup of human coffee warming his cold hands, he found that he did not mind. Perhaps, he thought, losing was not always a defeat. Perhaps sometimes it was the beginning of something better. Outside the assembly hall, the stars burned on, patient and eternal. Ships moved between them carrying goods and ideas and people. Somewhere out there, a vessel in distress was calling for help, and somewhere else, a human ship was changing course to answer. Because that was what humans did. That was who they were. And the galaxy was finally beginning to understand what it meant to be grateful.